Okay, my loves. I know there are a lot of you that are out there that are really wondering, how do I even set boundaries anymore? Maybe you didn't grow up with great boundaries. Maybe boundaries weren't really modeled well for you, or maybe you were told that you cannot have boundaries. Maybe you're tired of being gaslighted in your relationships, and you're tired of feeling crazy all the time and guilty for trying to make a difference in your life. If this is you, then I want you to come schedule a call with me. Let's chat about the Unashamed Image Program. The Unashamed Image Program is geared towards you specifically. I am going to be helping you in our next upcoming session of the Unashamed Image. I am personally going to train you how to not feel crazy when someone is gaslighting you, how to be able to stand your ground, to keep your boundaries intact, and to also see through the bull crap. I am also going to be teaching you how to set really confident boundaries that you can really rely on. And I'm going to help you communicate them in a way that really makes sense. Basically, I'm going to help you live a life free of shame and on your terms. If you are ready and you are done feeling all the shame and guilt for trying to set boundaries, if you are not willing to live another moment the way you are right now and in somebody else's shadow, then this is the time to schedule that call with me. It's completely free, no pressure, just love, just support. Go to www.erinandersonthetraumacoach.com. Scroll down the page to where it says, Let's Chat About Working Together. Click on that button and it'll take you to my booking page. If you're ready to live the unashamed life, schedule that call. Let's get you in the Unashamed Image Program, my loves. From my heart to your heart. Bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle with Erin Anderson, Betrayal Trauma Coaching. And I am Erin Anderson, your host. So yeah, let's dive right in. I'm, again, like I said, really excited to have you guys here to talk about healing from betrayal trauma. And last week we talked about the 5 steps to get you from the stimulus, or basically when your husband acts out, to the results you get. And if you remember, each one of those steps is you have your stimulus, you have the thoughts about that stimulus, you have the feelings you have about the stimulus, then you have the actions that you take, and then your results, okay? And so, and this is actually something you can use, this thought process, on pretty well anything in your life. If you're looking for a certain result, you can go back through those 5 steps and think on like what your thought processes are and your feelings and the way you've been acting upon those feelings. And also just another quick thing to refresh your memory is that the stimulus is really the only thing we cannot change in those 5 steps. The stimulus is just kind of what gets the ball rolling. But everything else you are in complete and utter control of. So with that, let's go ahead and get talking about why we find ourselves kind of stuck in each one of those steps, okay? And like I said, it really begins with the thoughts. It starts with the thought processes that we get from the stimulus. Now, I know for me, like, one of the biggest thoughts that was keeping me stuck in my trauma, especially surrounding my husband's addiction, and it wasn't just my husband's addiction that I struggled with, you guys. It was also abuse from other relationships in my life. I had abuse from my mom and my grandmother, and I had abuse from colleagues at work, neighbors. And I remember thinking to myself, why? Why on earth? Like, I must be the black sheep here because everybody's treating me like I'm the black sheep. Like, what is wrong with me? And I remember thinking that. What is wrong with me? Like, why? Why is everybody out to get me? And I literally thought that the only options I had to heal was either to leave all of my relationships behind, like just divorce my husband, cut off contact with my mom, cut off contact with my grandmother, cut off all contact with my family, never let them know where I was or what I was doing, and just, be done. I never see them again. Or they had to heal first before I could heal. Both of those thoughts were keeping me in a very, very stuck place. I cannot do anything. I mean, I couldn't do anything about my husband's addiction. Boy, did I ever try. Holy cow, did I ever try. I tried begging, I tried pleading, I tried giving ultimatums, which never worked. I kicked him out. He would beg to come home within a few hours. I would soften, and he came home. And things just never got better. And the same thing with my mom. I mean, I would beg her to be nice, or I would clean my house really, really hard and ignore every other duty I had to do, just so that way she would see some value in me. But those things actually didn't work. They didn't. And like I said, I mean, it's because I was so busy trying to control the outcome through them. And it's kind of like trying to filter water through plastic. It doesn't work very well, It just doesn't work. Like a sheet of plastic, you just don't filter water through that sheet of plastic. So, I was feeling really stuck because of these beliefs, and because of that, I was constantly having feelings of resentment. That's a big one. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, what resentment means. So I was having a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, depression, anxiety. I honestly had many thoughts, many times of taking my life. I came close to actually attempting to take it a couple of times, and which was really sad, Now I understand why the adversary put those thoughts into my head. But I know I'm going to stop there for just a second because I do need to say this. The reason why he put those thoughts into my head, Kay, because if you're dealing with abuse and you're dealing with, the victim mentality, and it's not that the victim mentality is necessarily as a bad thing. It becomes bad when it becomes a chronic problem, okay? And when it stays stuck with you. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you do. That victim mentality will follow you. It doesn't matter what relationships come into your life, that victim mentality will follow you. So it's something to be very cautionary about, okay? But the victim mentality was heavy on me, and I wasn't happy. And I realize now that the adversary was trying to get me to end my life because he knew that if I would realize his trickery in my life, I would turn around and literally make that scripture come true. You shall have power to crush, to bruise his heel, but he shall have power to crush thy head. You have the power to crush his head. And that is exactly what I've done, because without the pain and without the understanding and without the trauma I've gone through, I would not be sitting here in this seat teaching you guys what I've learned and how to hopefully, get to the other side. I mean, that's literally why I call it the other side of the struggle, right? Is because that's where I want you. I want you on that other side. I want you finding joy. I want you finding peace. And I want you to find the love that you deserve. And the adversary knew I would be doing that. He didn't forget. He didn't forget me. He didn't forget who I was in the pre-earth life. He didn't forget what I did in the pre-earth life to challenge him. And that tells me now that he was crazy scared of me. And the only way he wouldn't be scared of me is if he could get me to have absolutely zero power. Okay? So that was just something to think about. A little bit of a tangent there, but I really felt like that was a tangent that needed to be stated. Anyway, but back to the 5 steps. So I was feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling like I needed to take my life. The actions, there were times that I was so depressed and so sad that I couldn't get out of bed. I just wanted to drown it all, and so I would just spend hours on computer and phone games. My kids didn't get fed. I didn't do anything with them. I just didn't have the emotional strength or energy. And sometimes my husband would come home and literally nothing had been done. And I just remember being in that place and how much pain I was actually in and how debilitating it all was. I had gone to therapy, and I don't want to say without much success, because there were a lot of good things I learned in therapy, but none of it kept me out of the mire. And this is what I talk about, the difference between coping and healing. People aren't looking for ways to cope. I mean, a coping mechanism to me is staying in bed and watching videos or playing games just to drown out your pain and how much you hurt. And I didn't want to cope. I didn't want to cope with these things. I wanted to heal because I needed to be able to live my life. I needed to have a life. But the pain was so excruciating that it kept me from living. So those were some of my actions. I also remember fighting a lot with Ruben, threatening to divorce him, causing my kids a lot of trauma themselves as well. And they were little. I mean, my oldest, when this was happening, was, oh my gosh, probably 5, 6, I would say. Because it's been about a good 10 years since I've been healed. And so, yeah, probably about 5 years old was when this was all happening. He was between the ages of newborn to 5 years old. This was happening. And I had and he was actually probably 6, I would say. So, because I remember having I'm sitting here trying to think how long it had been. But yeah, I healed right around the time, I remember having my 3rd boy. So yeah, so he would have been about 6 years old by the time I started my healing journey. But there was a lot of trauma on those sweet little boys too. And I remember when my oldest was actually a newborn, well, not a newborn, but just maybe a few, 8, 9 months old, I'd say. So yeah, totally different from a newborn. I'm sorry, guys. I'm recalling my histories here. But I remember one time he was the sweetest, like easiest baby, never cried. And I just remember one time he grabbed me by the face, and he was like 9, 10 months old. He just put his hands on each side of my face, and he goes, "Ah!" at me. Kind of like, listen, mommy, listen. I'm trying to get your attention. And I knew, it was crazy. I totally knew what he was trying to say, what he was trying to get across to me. It was really interesting how I understood that. But my second son was really unhappy for like the first 2 or 3 years of his life. My eldest had a lot of trauma, and my third eldest had some trauma, though I would say his was probably the least extensive because it was right around the time he was a baby that I decided to heal. So my trauma was affecting my kids, and they were gaining trauma from my trauma. And it wasn't a good situation. Like, I could see that things were not good. Really, really not good. But I didn't know how to fix them. And so I stayed in these same cycles, and because I stayed in the same cycles, I kept getting the same results. And my results were constantly fighting, more trauma for my kids. Sometimes me leaving, here's a big result. My boundaries were never solid. Never solid. And so people kept walking all over me and kept using me. And, yeah, it was just a bad, negative situation. So I knew something had to change, okay, but I didn't know how to change it. I didn't know these things then. So I knew that I had to start changing something. And when I decided to hand my will over to God, one of the first things he started talking to me about was my worth. Because when you are in that depressed and anxious and painful state, you really question that. You really question if you have worth. And that is not where the Lord wanted me. He needed me to know that I was of infinite worth. Now, I know you guys have probably heard that before. And infinite worth, well, what does that mean? It means that you see yourself the way God does. If you see yourself the way God does, you are in awe of yourself. You have an absolute, literal awe of who you are as his daughter. And I didn't have that before, but as I began to know myself the way the Lord knew me, I did. I started gaining that awe. See, I couldn't show up for myself differently, and that's so important. The way you show up for you is so important. But you can't show up for yourself differently if you're waiting for all these broken people to show you how. The reason why they're painful, the reason why they're toxic is because they don't know how to show up for them either. So how can they teach you something they don't know? It's not possible. You have to be able to go somewhere that does know how to show up. And I would even go so far to say is this is possibly why therapy didn't really work for me either. And again, I learned a lot of good things. And I'm not saying it wasn't helpful, but it didn't, like I said, it just didn't get me where I needed to go. And because of that, like I said, I kept staying in these stuck cycles. But I think the reason why it didn't work was because you can't expect perfection where perfection is not. I realize now that I need two sets of parents. I need Um, my earthly parents, and I will say this, like, my dad is really a fantastic man. Like, I can't think of a better human than my dad. He does a lot of really good things, and he's been through the ringer with a lot of people. But he still is so strong. He's still so strong. And so I had a really good example from him, which I'm grateful for. But they're still imperfect. And I needed imperfect parents so I could have an imperfect example, because I am not perfect. So how do you feel about boundaries? It's a legitimate question. A lot of people come to me really struggling with this concept. They often feel guilty for setting boundaries, or they're not sure about even what a boundary is. You know, they've heard the term, set the boundary, things like that, but that's really confusing for them because it's not something that's well taught in our society nowadays, right? They know that boundaries are really important to having healthy, constructive, supportive, and wonderful relationships, but why? And oftentimes they also know that they feel like their boundaries are being violated, but they can't quite pinpoint what the boundary is that's being violated. That's why I've created the Clarifying and Creating Your Boundaries free PDF. You can find out what your boundaries are, how to tune in to what the boundary needs to be, and how to effectively create and communicate your boundary, so that way you stay in this place that respects you, respects the other person, but also gives you the confidence in your boundaries, so that way you stop being gaslighted, disrespected, and unseen. Having your boundaries really clear gives you a voice, and also helps the other person stay in accountability with themselves, so that's not a role that you have to take on anymore. So if you are ready to really have clear boundaries, to really understand what your role is in the boundary, and to give yourself some safety and some protection against people that might try to gaslight you or are just being disrespectful, go grab my Creating and Clarifying Your Boundary PDF at erinandersonthetraumacoach.com. And while you're there, let's schedule a call with me. Come have a chat with me so that way I can really, really help you master this particular skill, creating boundaries, clarifying the boundary, communicating that boundary, and so that way I can also help you have relationships that show up to support you, cherish you, and love you. But I also needed perfect parents, which I also have a set of those. And that would be my Heavenly Father and my Heavenly Mother, right? And I would go to them when I needed perfect advice. And I'm grateful actually now that I've gone through this. Not only do I get to sit here and teach you guys about betrayal trauma, but I gained a really crazy cool relationship with God and my Heavenly Mother and with myself. Who wouldn't want that? And this is why I call it, box pulled out of the sewer, awesome gift, because I think that Heavenly Father sometimes gives us these beautiful, beautiful gems wrapped up in a soggy box he pulled out of the sewer, because he wants us to trust him. He wants us to trust him. Miracles always feel like trials at the beginning. I've not yet had a miracle that didn't. If you think about childbirth, it's a lot of pain in the beginning. And I've done natural births. I've done this whole holistic birthing thing, and I actually do prefer it. But it still is really intense and a lot. I wouldn't say, okay, a lot of pain, but it's intense. It's way intense. And but yet I got a beautiful little miracle out of it every single time. And I think that's really interesting that the creation process starts with intensity. Miracles are the creation process, and it starts with intensity. So, something to consider. So anyway, back to our 5 steps. I realized that the things I was thinking was what was keeping me stuck. The idea that somebody else had to heal first, and that I questioned my worth. I questioned if I was loved, I should say. And I had to be willing to change those thoughts. Like, it was essential I changed those thoughts. So how did I change those thoughts? I started thinking about the things I did know. Well, I knew I was a child of God. I did believe that, but I didn't understand what it meant necessarily. I decided to think about my own dad, and now, some of you may have had a negative example from both of your parents. I'm grateful I didn't. But if you do, excuse me for the yawn. If you do have a negative example from both of your parents, consider, what do you think a perfect father shows up like? And I think that, a lot of our misunderstandings of God also lead to trauma. And I was told he was a perfect father, but I didn't necessarily understand that. I didn't think that way. So I had some trauma issues with God, too. I believed that he had abandoned me. So I had some abandonment issues with the Lord. But as I sat down, I thought about, what does a perfect father do? How does he show up? I realized some major characteristics about the Lord. And then I would envision, like meditate on that, and me going to him. If you remember, oh my gosh, guys, I'm sorry, I've got the yawns. If you remember the last episode, I talked about like sitting in a cabin with him in front of the fireplace. I had to envision what a perfect father looked like first. And then I would go to him with my struggles and my trials, and for perfect advice. And that worked really, really well, because I began to learn who I was to him. Not who I was to my husband, not who I was even to my kids, who were pretty innocent and sweet, but also who I didn't matter who I was to anyone else. Who I was to him is what mattered, because who I was to everyone else is exactly the way I was showing up, because I was taught that's the way to show up for my life. But once I realized God is love, therefore I must be love. God is truth, therefore I must also be truth. God is patience, therefore I must also be patience. God is amazing, therefore I must be amazing. God is a creator, therefore I must also be a creator. God is abundant, therefore I must also be abundant. I started realizing that the thoughts about my worth, that I wasn't lovable, that I wasn't good enough, were lies. They were genuine lies that the adversary had used to control me. Remember? suicide thoughts, they were lies that the adversary used to control me. And he did so that way he wouldn't ever be afraid of me. However, he made a mistake. As I sat there and started listening to his lies, I started realizing if he is the father of all lies, then, and God is the father of all truth, then if I took his lies and I literally flipped them, I would probably understand truth. He would have me believe I am unworthy and undeserving and worthless. That I'm a piece of garbage, and that's why people treated me. But I started flipping that to what the Lord wanted me to believe, which was truth. I know he's the Father of truth. And if the adversary is the opposite of the Savior and God, well, then what he says, I need to flip to the opposite to understand truth. I am worthy. I am deserving. I am crazy loved. The God of heaven loves me. He loves me so much that his son died for me. Somebody literally gave his life so that way I could be with him forever. That's how crazy loved I am. Get behind me, Satan. You have no place with me. None. And all of a sudden, I started to see myself so clearly. I understood what kind of a creator I am and that I have the ability to create crazy fun, crazy relationships, crazy, awesome joy, and peace and safety. What a fantastic lesson. And as I started thinking these things and switching what the adversary was telling me to joy, all of a sudden, and to truth, I should say, all of a sudden, I started feeling joy, like crazy amounts of joy that was spilling over onto my family, and peace and safety, and I was feeling great. I had energy again. I didn't want to stay in bed. I had a day to take care of. I wanted to love on people. And because of that, I started actually getting up and doing things. I had motivation again. And because I had motivation, my boundaries became crazy solid. Like, nobody breaks my boundaries. I had great relationships. People started treating me differently. They started treating me correctly. And I healed. It was a whole different ballgame, and it all started right there in that one little thing. I couldn't change the stimulus, guys, but I did change my thoughts about it. And once we understand truth, truth literally gives us joy and sets us free. Okay, so that's what I have for you guys when it comes to the 5 steps from stimulus to results. Okay. And next week we are talking, I'm going to pull it up really quick here, guys. Next week, we are talking about, as it pulls up, I should have had this up earlier, guys. I'm sorry, I have a podcast schedule, and I'm looking at it right now. How to change your thoughts. Next week, we are going to talk about how to change your thoughts and literally go from trauma to truth. Okay? So anyway, I love you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and listening in on this podcasting episode. Don't forget to tune in next week. It's gonna be